Welcome everyone to the latest discussion. Today we are going to be discussing melee weapons and handling such in an RP scenario. We're going to be looking at what counts as a melee weapon, how relevant are they within at least sci-fi RP in the setting of Ancerious, how do you actually write melee combat in the RP, what not to do with melee weapons, examples of melee weapon use in Ancerious, and how to design a cool melee weapon overall. So, to start off with, well, what counts as a melee weapon? Well, it's pretty cool, really. A melee weapon is traditionally any weapon that can be used in hand-to-hand or close combat. You've got to get up really fucking close, and you've got to actually make contact, physical contact with the target to do damage. However, yes, there are exceptions to this rule. There are some melee weapons that might release a wave of plasma, or might do ethereal stuff that harms the foe. There's always going to be exceptions, but for the most part, it's going to be you walking up to someone and bonking them, or like stabbing them, more or less. They can come in all shapes and forms, from your basic knives and bayonets that you find on like most rifles, to full-on like ceremonial halberds that are ornate for your super guard or whatever. Get energy weapons, esoteric blades and sonic manifestations, all sorts really. They can be anything you want them to be. Melee weapons can also be integrated with ranged weapons. However, depending on the design and such, they tend to be kind of unwieldy. We'll get to that a little bit later, yes, before anyone sort of likes to get smart, fists and hitting targets with blunt instruments counts as melee weapons by technicality. So, I think the main question that everyone is thinking about is, well, how actually relevant are they within sci-fi RP? Well, this is just going to be from an Ancerious perspective, but if you're going for a hard sci-fi level of sort of engagement with writing, TLDR, they're not going to be very useful. The most you will find is going to be stuff like knives or bayonets, because modern armies still use them to this day as a last resort, and it's pretty much you're only going to be used in point-blank range to engage the enemy, because those who are going to try and use them unironically are more than likely just going to get shot to pieces before they can actually strike. You might see them be used in stealth operations or in close combat aboard like ships or in urban environments, but even then you're going to have forces with like personal defense weapons where they can just walk around a corner and stitch up somebody with like 30 rounds before you can even shove the knife into their throat. So it's back and forth. Bear also in mind that a lot of the reasons why militaries carry knives around in today's world is not just to obviously use them for close combat, but because a knife is a utility, not just a weapon. You use it to cut stuff, help prepare your meals, help prepare positions, all sorts. As said, realistically, they're only really going to be used in confined environments. You're not going to see them in any other sort of scenario when you're in a sort of a realistic RP setting. Of course, unless it's a historical RP, in which case, I mean, come on, we're not here to discuss that. For Ancerious, obviously we operate on a realism but also balanced with rule of cool. So, even still, realistically, inside of Ancerious, melee weapons are only really going to be relevant in the scenarios that I have outlined, where, you're going to be fighting in urban and close quarters environments with, your energy blades, or your esoteric psionic knives, or your ceremonial halberds, or whatever. You're going to be fighting in these environments where you might have, personal shields or armour to actually tank a few rounds before you can, shove your spear into somebody and kill them. Don't try to, build around melee units as an actual force in RP, even in Ancerious, because while, yes, it's true, melee units are awesome, melee is awesome, you know, at the end of the day, you're not going to march some dudes with a shield wall into the open to fight a bunch of dudes with rifles, because you're just going to get shot to pieces. It doesn't matter how good your armor or like your defenses are. They just have the range advantage, and they're going to win every time before you can get to hit them. And in the end of the day, they can just, run away and then shoot you, and you have to run after them. So, yes, while we do have Rule of Cool, and as such melee weapons are going to be seen a lot more of compared to more realistic settings, you're still going to be only using them in very niche situations, because otherwise you're just going to get shot. Obviously, at the end of the day, they're also relevant for Rule of Cool RP, so if you have an RP where you do plan to have some sort of like melee combat, don't let realism get in the way, but at least make it believable. Don't just have a bunch of guys with rifles, just put them down in the field and then go beat each other with sticks, because that doesn't really make sense. But, if you plan to have a fight between two commanders for who has the better sword play or whatever, or some sort of honor duel or whatever, then yeah, sure, do it. Another interesting example of the fact that they're kind of relevant in Ancerious is that a lot of the entities, deities, and sort of high-level characters tend to use melee weapons purely because they are cool, and they invoke much more greater imagery in fight scenes used by those characters than, them just carrying around pistols or guns, etc. And I guess the sort of the in-law thing, and you see this in quite a lot of IPs, is that, having melee weapons is sort of helps channel their powers or whatnot to, go Super Saiyan or whatever to do cool abilities, but that's kind of a way to do things. Is there a valid sci-fi method of distance closing with melee equipped units? At the end of the day, not really. I mean, if you're in a closed environment, you're obviously going to get to somebody a lot easier, especially if you've got, I don't know, a shield, be that a physical shield or whatnot, so that they can't just shoot you. But if you're in an open combined arms engagement where, take for example Adelshaven that's going on at the moment, if you're landing in zone beta where you're having to cross nearly 100 kilometres to get to the front line in open plains and mountains, you're just going to get shot to pieces. You could have your infantry be mounted in vehicles, but that's just no different than any other infantry, and it will just get you to the battlefield quicker. But if you want to have your urban melee combat infantry be equipped with jetpacks or something, then that might help them get around a bit easier. It might not necessarily help them close, but it would definitely help with the environment. But yeah, your melee combat stuff is going to be niche. Even if it is Rule of Cool, you're going to get to use it, but know the right scenarios to use it in. Don't just... The one thing, I know that we'll get to this a bit later on, but you don't want to do total war in space, for God's sake. Because if you're lining up with melee infantry in, real life, let alone Ancerious, your army won't even see itself die, and it won't even see the enemy, because they'll just, fire 2 cruise missiles or do a single airstrike on you and just wipe out your entire army. So it's not going to go too well in that regard. You could use vehicles to push you up into a fortified position, but again, we're talking really niche environments here, which is kind of what I'm getting at with the whole, starship, interior, urban warfare. Anywhere where you're going to have close quarters fights, if you've got a method that can get them there, cool. they're going to be relevant in that environment anyway, but they're not going to be relevant in a conventional ground war or conventional battle or any scenario where those ranged units have more than, what, a couple seconds to raise their gun and put a round into you. Because if you're fighting in an urban environment, yeah, you could probably rush someone before they could turn their gun around and, you know, shove a sword into their chest. But, you know, if they've got several rooms worth of distance, they could just raise their, you know, gun, flick it to semi-auto and put, you know, several round bursts into you, and you're just going to go down. Unless you start throwing your sword, which you don't want to. Well, yeah, you can use, like, stealth and such to get it, but then again, we're getting into the stuff of you can have ninjas or, like, you know, stealth people that can go in, but then they're not really conventional forces. They're going to be stuff like special forces, where you're going to need stealth and that, so they will be relevant there if you want to have your special forces be equipped with, like, swords and melee weapons. That's cool. Most of them are in Ancerious, just because, you know, rule of cool, but yeah, at the end of the day, you want to keep them within their, like, niche, what they're good at. Don't just let rule of cool sort of override, I guess, sensibilities. So we're sort of going to transition then onto, like, how to write melee weapon combat. And this bit is actually really quite complex because, and I'm not trying to shit on anyone, but it's very, 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 very difficult to write melee combat unless you've actually done melee combat. This is just sort of my take on things, because for relevancy, I do Dark Age reenactment. I know how to fight with a sword, I know how to fight with a spear, I know how to fight with an axe, with a Dane axe, javelins, bows and arrows, etc. And I can sort of easily visualise how I would fight someone. So if somebody then came to an RP with me and was like, oh, well, you know, I, like, attack you and I swing at you, well, that's cool, but where are you swinging at me? So melee combat is very hard, traditionally, to write up, because it's very different to I shoot you. There is a very big difference, because every small little thing that your character does in melee combat might mean the difference between whether you get hit or whether you don't get hit. There is massive amounts of nuance in melee combat that everyone seems to overlook, because they don't necessarily have the experience or the knowledge to, like, do that, which is entirely fair enough, because not only is melee combat quite a niche thing that many people don't get to, like, actually write or experience, but not everyone gets to experience that and doing it, you know, in real life. So hopefully what I give to you in a minute will sort of help in that regard, but there is much more to melee combat beyond I hit you, I parry, or I dodge. So in order to write your melee fights, you obviously need to know the characters and individuals that are fighting. If you want a good melee scene in an RP where you and your opponent get to have fun, but also show off your characters and have a good time, even if it's within a battle scene where you've got lots of fighting going on, you absolutely want to focus on one or two characters having small fights. Never focus on entire units worth, because at that point it becomes way too unwieldy. You want to be able to take a perspective from, you know, a unit down to a particular character. It could be their leader, or it could be a person that you're using to tell from that sort of unit's perspective, and you want to have what's happening through their eyes. You know, you need to know sort of what weapons that unit has, how they're going to use them, etc. And you want to portray that through that one person, because it's going to be way easier to portray through that one person than it is to write up, like, 20 different. Your post is going to just balloon to insanity, and it's going to become really hard to know who is doing exactly what. So if you are going to have unit-on-unit fights, right from the perspective of the character, but kind of have the general motions or what the unit is doing, like, being mirrored for the character. So, like, the character does a heavy charge into combat, and it's like doing a particular fighting style. That's cool. You can then have that be sort of generally mirrored by the unit. So the unit combat would be a background thing. You focus on the character. Your opponent obviously focuses on their character. You guys have a character fight. Their lines are going to meet, and they're going to have like a background fight with the unit going on. The key part of writing melee combat, and I cannot stress this enough, is visualize it. Put yourself into their shoes. You need to be able to visualize how your characters are attacking physically. Are they doing an overhand blow to the opponent's head? Are they stepping forward and doing a stabbing motion to their chest? Yeah? Are they swinging a blade underhanded, or are they swinging it overhanded to try and hit a character's side? You need to picture your character making these attacks and then try to convey that through writing so that your opponent, or the other person that you're RPing with, can also visualize exactly what you're doing. So if I want to try and say, like, well, I'm just going to try and do a blow to my opponent's head, I will have that, he raises his right arm with his sword, pulls back, goes in, brings it over the top, and aims straight for the bit between his collarbone and his neck. Just to try and bisect them, kill them. End of story. If I can write that into the post, you guys would then be able to go, oh, okay, he's doing an overhand attack. That's cool. I will raise my left-handed shield or my blade or whatever to try and, stop that. Or I might try and dodge it and get out of the way by moving to the right. Or, something to that effect. This is the whole point with, again, on the flip side, you need to visualize how your character is going to try and deny that character the killing blow. Be that by dodging to the side, maybe sidestepping, or jumping back, or maybe even stepping into the blow. In the case with stuff like axes, you can actually step into the attack where you're just going to get bonked by the handle, but the blade's just gone behind you. So, are you going to try and batter away, a shield, or are you, with your shield, or are you going to try and do it with your sword, or do you want to do it with your dodge, etc.? There is a whole myriad of ways that you can try and avoid getting death killed by a single attack by just without just going the character dodges. Make the dodges, or make the parries, or make the whatever interesting, because you could do other things as well. Like, you can have your character, as I said, lean into it, or you can have your character lean to one side to have the blow come in and glance off your armour. You're not dodging and you're not parrying it, but you're still taking the hit and have it slide off. Now, you can always be extremely inventive with melee combat fight. Use your parries and, the dodges, but definitely try to do some of these other things as well. Try to be inventive in that regard. If somebody's doing an attack from above, well, that's cool. You can just sidestep, have it glance off armour. Somebody's doing a stab to your immediate front. You can put your shield in front of yourself. You can step into it. You can have their blade go onto your shield, slide off your shield, step into it, etc. But a key part to this as well is don't focus on just your weapons and back and forth, I hit you, I parry, or I dodge. There is a lot that goes on in fights that has absolutely nothing to do with your weapons. Footwork, is the de facto decider for melee fights. I do not give a fuck how good at fighting with a sword you are. If you have shit footwork, You are going to die within seconds. Combat is like dance. It is all about how you position your body and your body moving around as you go. And it is all about your footwork and how you put more pressure and move your centre of gravity around on your feet. It is like dance. Fighting and dance are extremely similar. Once you get footwork, you'll be fine. Write this in your post. If your character is doing a big overhanded attack, have them step forward into it, because they're putting much more of their force behind it and they need to put a foot out to try and stabilise themselves. Are they taking a massive blow on their shield? If so, they need to take a lower to the ground, more, robust stance of putting their legs out, one leg out behind them to try and, take the blow. Are they trying to sidestep? You need to have their body turn around. Just write little things about your characters that they're doing in that combat that aren't just to do with your weapons, etc. And just how are they putting energy into their shots? How are they putting their energy into dodging or parrying, etc. And this kind of goes into the next thing, is that fighting is absolutely tiring as hell. If your character is fighting a melee combat, and especially if they're wearing heavy armour and gear, swinging blades and that isn't easy, and neither is constantly dodging, getting out the way or parrying. As your fight goes on, incorporate that. Have your characters get tired. Have them get slowed down. Have them just, start properly panting and getting really tired, having issues with trying to fight their opponent. Remember to take hits. Don't just have it as I dodge, I parry, I hit you, I dodge, I block, I parry. Cool, that's alright, but remember that most melee fights, the key to any melee fight is you are trying to kill that person as absolutely quickly as you possibly can with the least amount of energy as possible. Your first couple of rounds of fighting should be you testing your opponent's defences. How good are they at blocking overhand attacks? How good are they with their shield? How good are they at blocking underhand attacks? Do they have a particular weak side that they seem to be struggling with if you hit them? Just try and incorporate that sort of thing in, where, you've got really big bursts of speed and energy at the beginning of the fight, where both characters are basically just yeah, whatever, I'm just going to put a shot in here, I'm going to parry this and, dodge this, that's fine, I've got loads of energy. But then as the fight goes on, you start getting tired, and when you start getting tired, you start making mistakes. If you start making mistakes, you start getting hit. You don't have to just have, one hit, you're dead. You don't have to do that. You can have stuff I've Pop here has his character hit mine with this massive axe, and I choose to block it on my shield. That's cool. That doesn't mean that you're completely fine. If you get hit and you parry, you're still putting all of that energy from that attack into your body. So that massive fucking impact that's just hit the shield has just gone into my left arm, it's just gone down to my left shoulder, and it's just gone into my body. My left arm now fucking hurts because I've just taken all of that impact. Okay, yes, you might be wearing power armour. That's still not going to mitigate all of the shock and the impact. If you get hit and you're parrying, have it so that they sprain themselves. Have it that, your guy staggers if he gets hit. Maybe that throws him off a second and, your opponent might be able to get another hit in. Always try to take hits and injuries. Maybe they get shot through on your leg and they cut your leg, and so your character's a bit, slower or whatever. Maybe they hit one of your arms and suddenly they can't use, both of their arms anymore. Or they take a particular heavy hit to the head and then suddenly, their ears are ringing and, they're disorientated for a moment. Remember to take hits. Taking hits makes the fight interesting. Yes, I know I'm asking a lot, because some people might be like, oh, well, what if my opponent doesn't do that? Well, here's the thing. This is the same thing with any RP, if you take losses and hits regularly, yeah, people will trust you and people will want to RP with you more. And if they trust you and they want to RP with you, they are way more likely to let you get hits in on them and for them to take more losses or more injuries than normal. So, take hits, write interesting hits. It doesn't have to be just one tap dead, yeah? Keep your fighting interesting by using different methods other than just, I dodge, I parry, whatever. When in doubt, look up stuff on YouTube. If you are not sure how to visualize a fight, look it up. If you find a particular fight on YouTube that you're like, damn, this fight is actually really awesome, I'm going to have my character do something like that. Link it in the RP chat. Say to your opponent, my character is sort of fighting like this, he's doing overhead attacks like this, he's trying to get through your shield like this. That will then help your opponent because they can be like, oh, okay, no problem. Well, I'll try and do what this guy is doing in the video and, like blocking, with the shield and, blocking like this and sidestepping and, all this sort of things. Have it be interesting and cool and try to help each other visualize. If you don't quite understand what your partner is doing, ask them. It really is that simple. If you are going to do something like a feint, yeah, you should say so in your post. You can just say, I put a shot with my right arm, as we said earlier, coming in between your neck and your collarbone, yeah? But at the last possible second, that character flicks his wrist to the right. Okay? Now that single action, from your arm going down straight to you flicking your wrist to the right, means that all of a sudden you can also turn your elbow slightly, and now you're putting that blow straight into his side. So if they have raised, their sword arm or whatever, or their shield arm or whatever, well, it'd be sword because you don't block high with a shield, but we're getting into semantics. If they've raised it high to try and stop that blow, and then you've suddenly swung underneath them to put a hit in, you can then write as the opponent, oh, well, he takes the hit into the side and then he gets staggered or whatever, or like it cuts into his armour, or, a myriad of different things. Or you can have that he desperately at the last chance, puts his shield into the way, but he takes the hit and he gets staggered back a moment and then he's like out of breath or some shit. There's, the whole point is to work with your opponent. At the end of the day, you want the melee fight to be absolutely awesome because they're much more personal fights. There's much more detail involved in the characters, and it's a really good way to actually RP out characters. Especially for, and this is kind of another reason why entities and deities tend to use melee weapons, is because the whole RP is emphasising characters. And you want to have fights that emphasise characters. While a firefight doesn't emphasise a character. It's very impersonal. But a melee fight, up close and personal, with you looking into your opponent's eyes, and you both physically testing each other's mettle by seeing which person's faster, which person hits harder, which person has the most stamina, is suddenly very personal and can help you show off your characters in detail, and in ways that you didn't think to show them off. Did you ever discuss how much stamina your character has? Have you ever thought about how hard they hit? Have you ever thought about how fast they are? Have you ever thought about how precisely their fighting style might be? Well, time to find out. Time to write about it. Why not flesh it out? But yeah, it's just a case of trust your writing partner. If they are doing the whole thing of, you are giving ground and, you're having that your person, takes hits and gets injured and they're getting tired, but the opponent's just there like, oh, well, it doesn't matter, and they're just, casually parrying, blocking and dodging everything that you do, bring it up to them. Just be like, yo, dude, like, I'm putting in the effort here, but you're not. And it's kind of getting tiring because you're, completely blowing off everything that I'm doing. While I'm actually taking things here, do we want to have a bit of give and take? Because this is getting kind of boring. Bring it up. Especially here, I mean, if you bring something like that up, an admin or a guide might step in and just be like, yeah, it's a bit shitty, really. Like, just do this. And most people will be happy to just be like, oh, sorry, no problem. And they'll write in that sort of thing with you. Melee combat, I find, is something that absolutely positively needs really good trust and writing skills with your opponent, and for you to actually enjoy and be in a good setting with your opponent, because otherwise it straight up does just become, I dodge, I parry, I hit you, I dodge, I parry, I hit you, every time, without fail. It just, that's all it is. So that's kind of my overview. Visualise, work with your opponent, and put in the detail that you wouldn't normally find. I know it might sound a bit complex or simple depending on people, but use YouTube, people. Use YouTube. Especially if you're using a weird weapon that you have absolutely no idea how to facilitate the combat use of. Please do use YouTube for that. It's what I do. So, what not to do with melee weapons? Well, number one, please for the love of God, do not parry ranged weapon shots. Especially, and I can't believe I need to say this, but I have seen it done in RP in several settings, including this one, you are not parrying lasers or railguns. Period. End of story. If I catch you doing it in an RP, I will make sure that your character dies a horrible death. A horrible, horrible, horrible death. Because it's meme tier. You don't parry ranged weapon shots. You just don't. Okay, maybe your Special Forces Super Ultra Giga character can parry, like, a bullet, a conventional bullet. But you don't parry a laser, and you don't parry a railgun. Alright, maybe if it's an entity or a deity doing it, cool. But, like, any normal character, like, just GTFO. And even so, even if you are a normal character, you shouldn't be bloody parrying, you shouldn't be parrying shots out of the air. I mean, for Christ's sake, it's hard enough hitting an arrow out of the air with a stick. Like a really small bamboo stick. Trust me, I've tried. And I got hurt doing so. But, yeah, it's not easy. Also, as sort of I stated before, never use melee-focused forces in open battlefields against range opponents. You will be slaughtered. I will make sure you will be slaughtered. You should not be using total war tactics against modern militaries, let alone Ancerious militaries. Yes, I understand rule of cool exists, but there gets to be a point where it stops being rule of cool and straight up breaks suspension of disbelief. For example, I've seen elsewhere people take melee units to fight ranged units and win, purely because the ranged units decided to do something extremely dumb that put them into a position where the melee units would win, even though no sane commander with half a brain cell who commanded the ranged units would ever do what they did in that situation, just so that the melee troops could have a chance or win. There is rule of cool, and then there is suspension of disbelief. And breaking that is stupid, and it really degrades an RP, in my opinion. No Last Samurai charges, like, against Gatling guns, for Christ's sake. As I said a minute ago, never just I dodge or I parry in melee fights every single turn. It is boring as hell. It's the equivalent in space battles of I just evade or I tank it on my shields and my shields are down to 96%. It is exactly the same thing. You want to be making progress, you know, after the first couple of turns in a melee fight, after the characters have tested each other, just like after I shoot you in space, you are going to be taking some damage, irregardless of what your defensive systems are. Yeah. Avoid, as I said, causing suspension of disbelief. If it's just for, like, rule of cool, don't confuse the two. Never never fucking use melee weapons against armoured vehicles. Again, I have seen in other places people like to have melee weapons that are effective against armoured vehicles. Okay, that's cool. You've developed a weapon that can be used against the tank. How are you going to get there? How are you not going to get shot by the tank and all of its supporting forces on the way in? It doesn't happen. Please don't do it. My personal rule, don't use katanas. They're a shit weapon. They always have been. They always fucking will be. You're not here for an edge contest. That's just me personally. I don't like katanas. They're terrible weapons. And also, if you're having a melee fight, never just leap around characters doing the literal nothing personal kid. You know, it's all okay if you try to outmaneuver your opponent and get behind them, but it's very hard to just casually sidestep an opponent and get behind them in a melee fight, especially if it's one-on-one, because there's an amazing ability where you just turn your body on the spot to face them. I know, it's pretty groundbreaking, but you'd be surprised. And anyone who tries to do the like, I know that this is kind of going into rule of cool, and yes, of course, rule of cool does apply to this, but I will say it now. If at any point, if you're trying to have at least a semi-realistic fight, you try to use Jedi fucking tactics where you're jumping around, leaping, turning your back and doing all of this cool stuff, you die instantly. Well done, you've turned your back on your opponent, you're dead within seconds. If you give your opponent, who is, at least semi-competent, an opening in a melee fight, they will take advantage of that in an instant. They will go for it. We obviously do reenactment, but we're trained that if we just even can sniff weakness in like a particular fucking flank of an opponent, and they move their shield just a couple of inches out of place, well, that's cool. I've just put my sword straight into the side of your body. Well, you're technically dead now. So, and if I can do that, why can't your superhuman people, like, thousands of years into the future who have, like, mega reflexes, So, just, yeah, don't go spinning and twirling all the time. Like, yes, okay, do it for some cool fights occasionally, but for fuck's sake, if I see a bunch of, like, ninjas just spinning and twirling everywhere, I'm just gonna step in and just fucking kill them all. Like, I mean, come on. The whole point is, kind of like in ranged combat, you want to make yourself as small a target as possible, and you want to give your opponents as small openings as possible. So no, throwing yourself and bigging yourself up and throwing yourself around everywhere, because you're just going to get stabbed in the back by some guy with a knife. Yeah, just don't do it. So, examples of melee weapons used within Ancerious, at least. Well, number one is the various deities and entities in the ongoing Mortal Coil arc, along with numerous esoteric psionic panopticon forces using them. They're sort of used as a sort of focus for their powers and abilities. As we said before, in these circumstances, melee weapons are much more intimate, and that especially works well in a character-based RP, which is, the case there. It's focusing on the entities and deities. It's trying to be intimate. It's trying to show off their powers. The army of the Panopticon itself is supposed to be quite, ethereal, so they can, manifest out of thin air and do, like, crazy stuff like that. That sort of scenario, it's worked really well. Another one is the kind of overall, most forces within Ancerious tend to have some sort of like secondary melee weapon for their infantry in close combat. These can be just straight up like bayonets or monomolecular knives, because again, as I said, a knife is a utility weapon. anything that they have ready for if there is a scenario where there could be some melee combat. Other nations do have, dedicated, like their infantry does have dedicated capabilities. I know the Union, for one, my faction, have wrist-mounted energy blades. If they need them in close combat, they can use them. But they have been used in several RPs, not as a focus, but as like a cool side thing. We've got other character arcs going on, which, have seen characters favouring specific melee weapons in close confined environments, where they've been, like, fighting on ships or, in urban centres. Again, it allows them to have cooler, more down-to-earth fights, which are sort of much more focused rather than just entire forces going crazy. Many nations also have ceremonial melee weapons, for military units on parade or palace guards and the like. Remember, just because you have melee infantry, for example, you don't have to use them in frontline combat. You can just have them as, like, a ceremonial unit that guards well-known places in your nation. And in the end of the day, many nations here do have melee weapons just for rule of cool. I mean, we have several melee sheets that, I've drawn up weapons for, and people have just, wanted because they're cool. And at the end of the day, melee weapons are cool, so you will see their use within Ancerious. And sort of last thing is, like, how to design a cool melee weapon. Well, number one, ask yourself a question. Do you want the weapon to be practical? Or do you want the weapon to be rule of cool? That is your first question to ask yourself. If you want it to be practical, just pretty much you want to give it as little flair as possible. You don't want it to be super glowy, you don't want it to be super inundated with designs and gadgets and everything. You want it to look like it can work in a fight. You want it to make it look like your units can use this weapon, yeah? You also want to think about why would they use it doctrinally. Are they issued them for, specific close quarter combat? Maybe they are forces that are designed to operate in boarding on a spaceship or in dedicated urban environments. So are they given, a sword doctrinally for this potential scenario? If so, is it a long sword that could potentially get stuck in environments? Is it a short sword that maybe might collapse down in the blade? If so, you want to make it small and compact so it doesn't take up more room on the soldier's body, but they can pull out and flip out, on a dime. Think about, what scenario the weapon would be used in and build the weapon for that scenario. You can still make it look cool, but just don't try to, overdo it, because you're going to be using these. You don't want it to be crazy. If you're going for rule of cool, go fucking bananas. Look up weird and exotic weapon types that fit your faction's aesthetic. Give it loads of flair, give it pomp, give it grandeur, make it look fantastic, futuristic, etc. Make it glowy, I don't know, it depends what you're going for. If it's ceremonial, then you can make it really impractical because, it's just for show, it's not for use. You can make it so that it has loads of inlaid, beautiful tapestries in the blade, or give it lots of flair on the hilt, or, the pole of it, or whatever. Just make it look crazy and awesome. You can obviously go for a between the two, in which case, yeah, give it some flair, but do try to make it practical, because there's nothing worse than creating some horrifically insane polearm that would look like it would get caught on the guy's own armour, let alone, in the super confined melee environment that he's supposed to be using it when, he can't even get through the fucking door with it. So definitely design it for the situation at hand. Try to go for something unconventional, in my opinion. I mean, yeah, swords, axes and spears are cool, but they're often quite overdone. Especially swords. I know that swords are, like, super easy and quick, but try to go for some wacky designs. I mean, we've got some on the melee sheet, which, I mean, Jesus Christ, there's a fucking chainsaw made out of teeth. There's a literal hedge trimmer, but you know, go for weird and wacky designs that might be quite funky. And of course, if you are trying to make a melee and sort of slash firearm design, make it so it is good for both. Don't make it a horrific amalgamation of the two, because a lot of, you know, melee firearm amalgamations that I've seen just look so goddamn unwieldy for both roles, let alone just one of them. Like, it'll be a gun with some massively oversized sword on it. Well, okay, that's cool, but what happens if you try to aim it? Like, there's a dirty great big sword on the end of it. How the fuck are you going to keep that stable if you're trying to shoot? Or, oh, it's a giant fucking spear, but it's also got a gun inbuilt into it, but the gun is like beautifully filigreed and looks really small and stuff. Well, that's going to be great, but unfortunately, by the time I've rammed it into some guy 5 times, the gun's fucking broke, and all the systems on it won't work, so I can't bloody shoot it anymore. So, if you're going to make gun blades, please try to make it so that it looks workable, instead of just something that I'd, you know, pick up and either try to slit my own throat with or shoot myself, depending on, you know, how easy it is for one or the other. So that's kind of the overviews that I have so far. So let's go through some of these questions. So if you're supporting melee units on the battlefield, is it useful to have visual denial for support, like chaff, smoke, etc., to make it much more harder for the opposing army to lay down supporting fire? Yes, because that's pretty much the TLDR for any unit. You want to do that for everyone, let alone melee units. You always want to try and deny vision and reconnaissance and intel to the enemy. What else have we got? What conditions did you say makes melee relevant? Yeah, urban assaults, starships, anything close quarters, sometimes special forces, anything that you can get up close to your enemy and give them minimal time to engage you effectively is a viable time to use melee combat. What is the worst example of melee that you've seen in Ankh? Oh, if only Neo was here. Alright, the worst example that I could think of was during the end of the Uprising arc, where me and Neo had both of our special forces, who were kind of like entities, go to assassinate the head guy who had been behind the whole Uprising arc all along. And they had a little fight with one of Neo's generals that he had, and that was a cool fight. That lasted only a couple turns though, and then it was supposed to be like, alright, we're here to kill, and I can't believe I'm going to say this, Xeon, as he was known at the time. Yes, he was straight up ripped from Gundam. But the whole point was that we were going to go there, assassinate this guy, and then, you know, everything would be over. Unfortunately, things got changed, and it turned out that Xeon had been executed by this, like, Drake guy, and he had created these, like, Lich Drakes things, which were in turn were the Aberration, and there were, like, 8 of them, and it was me and Neo's, like, super mega OC snowflake people. And I'm not joking when I said we went for about 20 turns, and they took absolutely no damage. In any capacity. We never even killed one. In fact, I don't even think we injured one. By the end of it, both of our characters had, like, really injured fucking limbs. Neo's character had his chest torn open. My guy had his helmet caved in, and, like, literally every single attack we tried to make, it was just, I parry, I dodge, oh, teleports behind you, nothing personal, kid. Every single post. And we never actually finished that RP, mind you. It got to the point where me and Neo said, no, enough, we're not doing this anymore, and we just wrapped up the RP, and we nuked the entire city from orbit, and that was the wrap-up for that entire arc. So, yeah, moving swiftly on. Would melee at larger scales work, like mech combat, Gundam-sized, etc.? Yeah, they scale up. I mean, if you can somehow get your 60-foot mech close enough to another 60-foot mech to punch it in the face, then absolutely. I mean, what I said with the whole visualize how you're going to attack, and then just write it. And if you've got a dude in your RP who's willing to do that with you, then awesome. Like, absolutely go for it. It all just scales up. I mean, obviously it's much harder, in my opinion, to get a large-scale mech into close combat with another one, purely because, obviously, infantry are quite small on the general battlefield, so you can easily get them into, you know, urban areas and close combat environments fairly swiftly. With a big mech, I think the only environment that I could possibly think of would be urban combat in a massive, like, Ecumenopolis, where it doesn't matter where you are, there is just huge streets with, like, line-of-sight blocking stuff everywhere. That is the only time that I could see that really being the case. But other than that, everything scales up pretty much. And the art looks really good, by the way. I will go over your art in a minute, Everton. So does anyone else have any questions about melee weapons? And I will quickly add the bit of faints to that. What was the best example of melee? I think the best example of melee that I've had so far has more than likely either been the fight between Remus, who was the sort of like big bad of the Price of Power Entity Deity RP, or, and it's ironic because Dan's currently muted, the fight that I had between a Triarch captain and a Carnathian boarding squad in one of our RPs, where we had like a melee fight on the bridge of a starship. And the most interesting melee weapon that you've seen in oh, Jesus Christ, it's going to have to be the fucking, the hedge trimmer. The weed whacker. The weed whacker is just the best. Who wouldn't use like a grass trimmer on the enemy?
I can go and get the weed whacker real quick for those interested.
Yeah, Elliot, it did get, if you are supporting melee units on the battlefield, it is useful to have vision denial, because it's useful to have vision denial in general for any unit. Any other questions? Several people are typing. For whip/thread weapons, what are the ergonomics like? Oh, Jesus Christ. I've only handled whips a couple of times in my life, but I'm gonna guess it's like one of those weapons where you have to try not to kill yourself every time you use it. Yeah. That's all I can really say. Yes, powerful scions can just make melee weapons out of their psionic powers. You can just summon a sword or something. That is a relevant thing. Right, I think I will take one more question. And then we'll wrap. Any other weapon we should avoid other than the katana? Ooh. It's a good question, actually. I can't really think of any off the top of my head. The katana's the only really one that, like, I couldn't think about. Nunchucks are fine. But yeah, oh yeah, Drax got it. Anything that is horrifically oversized and unwieldy. If you have some, like, Final Fantasy VII Cloud-esque weapon, your character will die. End of story. There is no realistic way that you can parry or use that in close combat. Any sort of speed able to defend yourself. Anyway, we shall leave it at that. So, thank you all, and that will be signing off for this session.